The question that seemed obvious to me from very early on in the pandemic was simple. Why was COVID still circulating in highly vaccinated regions? It was important because what you had was a situation where almost in some areas, I think, say, for instance, in Portugal, like 95% of the population was vaccinated. And you're still seeing significant circulation of the virus. Now, the answer to that has been that, oh, they're variants, and so therefore the vaccine needs to be updated. And so therefore, when you get updated vaccines, you will have more protection against the new variations, the new variants. And if you understand anything about immunology, it that makes no logical sense in the sense not that you it's not that you don't have increased risk of infection with regards to variants. It's just that in a normal immune response, you take a number of points from a virus or a bacteria to develop an immune system response. And so, therefore, slight adjustments to the spike protein shouldn't impact on your immune system unless the immune system is too concentrated on one part of the virus or the immune system has shifted to a different mode. And this is essentially what I'm talking about today. This paper, it has actually been available since about April, and I had glimpsed it and hadn't spoken about it. But it's a very important paper looking at post vaccination IgG4 and IG2 class switch associated with increased risk of SARS CoV 2 infection. So, this is what we have suspected, but this is very clearly pointing to the fact that this is occurring. I mean, it's almost obvious. And the question is I just don't understand why this isn't obvious to everybody because it's still circulating in highly vaccinated regions. So there has got to be an issue that needs to be addressed. What I have decided to do is because this is an important point and one that actually needs to be quite nuanced. So you have to understand that just because something happens doesn't mean that you necessarily discard what it is. You just need to understand what it's doing, why, and work out if this is an appropriate response. So, what I am interested in is not whether or not you people need to use the vaccine. It's just what are the implications in an environment where you have highly boosted populations. What happens when you have ongoing circulation of the virus? That's all I am focused on at the moment. And so this is the topic I'm doing this Thursday in the next few days. This is a little bit later than usual to share it, but COVID boosters, are they putting you at risk? That's the question that I want to try and answer. And it's a big topic. It's not straightforward. And there is a reason why I say it's not straightforward. If you understand autoimmunity around severe COVID, and this is the bit that people don't quite get, remember, it's not the virus that killed the people, meaning that it's not the virus that did its direct action and killed the majority of people. There are some people who, yes, died from the viral infection, but they usually had underlying lung disease. But what really did the damage was the cytokine storm, where the immune system overreacted after the viral infection. So sometimes up to a week to 10 days after the infection, you had this cytokine storm. This just ripped through the lungs and caused people to die. This was the reason why they used steroids in the context of severe COVID. It was probably one of the most effective strategies. It was way more effective than, say, using an antiviral like remdesivir, which didn't really impact on mortality. And so, what that tells you is that immune suppression seems to be central to getting benefits in severe disease. That's where I'm nuanced because what is very clear is that the multiple boosting of the vaccines seems to be driving tolerance to the spike protein. And if it is the spike protein that is triggering cytokine storms, then you have to be very careful when you have a cohort of people who are already boosted. So this is nothing to do with the unvaccinated, but if people are already boosted, what in the world do you do if the primary mechanism of protection is about tolerating the spike protein in an already compromised immune system? It's a big question and it requires some thought. And this is why I said I'm going to go through this. What really are those risks? Where does it lie? If you're interested, join me as I try and dissect what in the world is going on. The link is in the description. For those people who don't know anything about the this spike protein and this tolerant antibody, just a few simple things which I will go through again in the presentation on Thursday, but just some simple pointers. As we know, this is the virus, this is the spike protein. This spike protein is on the surface of the virus along with multiple other proteins. And usually, in a normal immune response, it will take epitopes or it will take pieces of the spike protein plus the membrane protein, plus the envelope protein, plus the nucleocapsid protein, and it will do all of those together, plus the ORF proteins inside, and it will have a broad immune response. But because of what happened in the pandemic, where they decided to focus on the spike protein, for many people, it has been largely a spike induced response, only this part of the virus, which then keeps on changing. That's a problem. But when it came to the immune response to the spike protein or to anything, the first thing you have to understand is this broadly are all the classes of immunoglobulins. This is what these are like the missiles of your immune system, long reaching, can target infections at a distance. IgA is more in secretions. IgG is long lasting. IgM is early. IgE is allergic. IgD, we don't really talk much about. But even within this IgG class, you have the IgG1, which is really your long term immune system, and IgG3, triggering strong immune responses. IgG4 and IgG2 tend to be more tolerant, especially IgG4. And the question is, why would the immune system be shifting towards IgG4 instead of IgG1 and IgG3? It can't be what you want when you talk about the immune response, because if you are trying to get rid of the spike protein and the virus, the better and stronger the immune response, the better it would be. If you're trying to tolerate the spike protein and the virus, then you want IgG4. Question is, that was not the plan. It is just one of those unknown unknowns that occurred that they don't quite want to acknowledge. And as I reminded you, which I'll go through later in the day, if the link is in the description, again, IgG1 and IG3 trigger inflammation, IgG4 trigger tolerance. And sometimes your body needs to do that because there is too much inflammation, which would make sense because the spike protein triggers this kind of response. And early on, you have to remember what was quite strange about this. We knew this was unusual from very early in the pandemic. This paper was done from 2022, looking at the class switch. 38.6 times increase in IgG4 after the third dose. 4,000%. This was a red flag, and I had been talking about it as well as others since then. It's like nobody was interested. I mean, can you believe it? Now, this does happen with other vaccinations. Certainly, the malaria vaccine, it can happen with, and I think the HIV vaccine, and I think sometimes with multiple boosters with the pertussis vaccine. But it's not normal. It's not what you expect to happen after infection or vaccination, that the immune system would shift to being tolerant. I don't quite know. Well, I have some thoughts as to why this is primarily an mRNA problem. This is the other part of the picture that's very important. that when you look at what happens, and again, this is another paper from 2023, this is 2 years ago, we knew about this, that when vaccination with mRNA, up to 45% of the antibodies are IgG4, the tolerant ones. And this was in people who had vaccination, no infection. It was a bit lower if they had vaccination and then an infection. And when you looked at the vector vaccines, it was only 16.6%. So it can trigger it, but much lower levels. If people had natural immunity, it's 1%. So, in theory, comparing somebody who had a natural immune response to COVID to if they had um, mRNA with no infection, you're talking about 45 times higher IgG4. So this was always very strange. And it was something that, truthfully, there is no good reason that this was not looked at in more detail. But eventually it did occur. And this is where this paper comes in, because what they highlighted, and I'll go through the paper in more detail in the presentation if you want to join me, the link is in the description. But what they highlighted here is that elevated IgG4 levels, this is from the abstract or the summary. I just highlighted these two lines. Elevated IgG4 levels and higher ratios of non-cytophilic to cytophilic antibodies. These are just different types of antibodies that target the spike protein or the virus after booster vaccination were significantly associated with an increased risk of breakthrough infections. We're talking about an 80% relative risk increase. These findings suggest a potential association between IgG4 induction by mRNA vaccination and a higher risk of breakthrough infection, warranting further investigation into vaccination strategies to ensure sustained protection. Important point. And what is very important about this study, there'll be people who try and tell you, oh, well, it doesn't mean anything too much, don't worry too much about it, or more research to come. They can't do any more research unless they had started this research, like what happened in Spain. This is what they did. It's not easy. You can't replicate this unless you had intended to look for it. And when they looked at it, they started in September 2020, looking at time frames, looking at infection all the way, looking at primary vaccination, looking at all the different waves of viruses, of variants coming through, looking all the way to time 13. They started this in 2020. This cannot be replicated unless somebody else was doing this along the same line. So the problem that people have when they try and discount it is that they can't actually challenge it unless they were looking for it. That's the problem. This kind of data is gold dust. That's the kind of research that we need because it can't be refuted and it makes perfect sense. This is why we see COVID circulating so highly in highly vaccinated regions. The higher the IgG4 level, the higher the risk of infection. If it's 10 times higher of IgG4, there's an 80% increase or relative risk increase of infection. Makes perfect sense. The question is, why does it occur? And what does it mean in the longer term? This is the bit that nobody wants to tackle. When I look at it, I'm hoping to be able to try and differentiate why I think this happens with mRNA, and I think it's because of the addition of this proline residue. We'll go through that in the presentation. If you want to join me, please look in the description and click on that link. But the point is that there is something very unusual happening here. It should never have been discounted or ignored from 2022. We're now having clearer evidence that this is an unusual pattern that we didn't expect with the spike protein. But what we're not sure of yet is whether or not this necessarily leads to harm. As I explained before, if you look through the autoimmune paradigm, where the immune system's overreaction to the spike protein is the problem, this may actually potentially have some protective effects, but only if people stay on the hamster track and keep running. They can't come off it, because if they do and the IgG4 levels fall, suddenly they are at risk still of reinfection with potentially other immune hyperactivity responses. The reason, however, why we have to understand this is because potentially it means that other therapies could be doing the same thing without the other risks that are associated, the myocarditis, the other inflammatory risks that are associated. This is why we have to understand it. But as I warn people, these days we are in uncharted territory. We need to think very carefully to try and understand what is the next move and how do we handle it. So, if you want to hear me try and dissect it, join me. COVID boosters, are they putting you at risk? The link is in the description. Would love to have you as we go through the science. And as usual, for those people, me and try and make sense out of the situation we are in. Still a lot of work to be done. The implications are still pretty serious, but let's hope that we can find answers in the near future. Have a great evening.